Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'll show you some easy techniques for drawing foliage, trees and water, approaches that you can use in many different landscapes. You only need a few simple things to get started, and these are the materials that I'll be using today. I've got some smooth heavyweight paper, some Staedtler Mars Lumograph Graphite pencils ranging from HB to 8B. My favourite eraser of all times because it's so precise, it's the Tombow Mono Zero eraser. A few different sized blending stumps, and lastly a sharpener. After establishing a few outlines of your image, we're going to start by blocking in the main shapes or masses using a blending stump. The blending stump technique allows us to quickly establish the image via tonal values so we can see it almost like a blueprint leading us forward. You'll notice the image comes together quite quickly, which is a great foundation for us to add the details over the top of. To load the stump with graphite, scribble some graphite onto a spare bit of paper and then rub the stump into it. Once you've established the larger masses, we're going to move on to some pencil work. I like to call this the modelling stage because we're now using a variety of pencil marks and techniques to create illusion of depth, form and texture. In the past, I've heard artists describe this pencil technique as scribblism, which involves using controlled overlapping scribbles to suggest texture of leaves and foliage. So all I'm doing here is using a mid-value tone and making a loose figure of 8 motion over and over again to establish the shape and texture of the foliage. And because these elements are further in the distance, I'm making them much smaller so that they give the illusion of foliage far away. We're then going to use a blending stump to gently soften those marks, and this helps to create smoother surfaces so we can continue to work over it. Then we can begin introducing a wider range of tones by adding darker values where the foliage is in shadow and lifting out lighter areas with the Tombow Mono eraser. Removing graphite in this way creates highlights and helps to suggest sunlight filtering through the leaves. We're going to continue this process throughout the rest of the foliage and the trees there in the background. And while we do this, I just want to recap what we've just learnt to the modelling stage. So number 1, we are going to be using a technique often referred to as scribblism, creating lots of loose figure of 8 marks to suggest texture and mass of leaves. The second thing we will do is use the blending stump to softly blend the graphite together, which creates a smoother surface to work back over the top of. And the third thing we will do is go back over the areas with a darker value pencil, so this could be 4B or 6B, to strengthen the shadows and to add more depth. And lastly, the fourth thing that we will do is use the Tombow Mono eraser to lift out the highlights, and this helps to create contrast and suggest areas where the foliage is catching light. Objects that are closer to the viewer or areas that fall into shadow will naturally appear darker in value. So here I'm using a 4B pencil as my mid-tone value and applying loose scribbled marks in the direction of the bank, and this will establish its texture and form. Once that's done, I use the Tombow Mono eraser to lift out some of the lighter plants and highlights along the bank. Finally, I return with a 6B pencil to strengthen the darkest shadowed areas, and this increases the contrast and helps the bank feel more solid and three-dimensional. You can go back and forth with this process as much as needed, alternating between adding darker values and lifting out the lighter ones to create that interesting texture. But it's worth mentioning that there are limits to how much graphite can be removed, especially those darker areas. Repeatedly erasing heavily worked areas can damage the surface of the paper underneath, which makes it more difficult to achieve clean highlights and smooth tonal transitions. So for that reason, it's often better to build up the dark values gradually rather than applying them too heavily at the start. Let's move on to drawing the water. The principles are very similar to those we've already been using, but in this case we want to keep the marks much softer and smoother. Water generally has fewer hard edges and textures than foliage or bark, so the aim is to create subtle transitions between the tones. It's also important to consider what is being reflected on the surface of the water, and I have just the technique for this. By placing a piece of glass on the horizon line there, it will reflect whatever is above. You can go with your pencil and just make some marks to indicate where the masses are, and go back in with your pencil to add the darker values, and repeat the process between the mid values, the dark values and the highlights. To show the direction of the water, you can add a few subtle ripples on top of the water's surface, and this will give you the illusion of some water flowing. You can add the shadows and highlights to this to really enhance that too. This fallen over tree is right in the focal point of our picture, so we want to make it nice and sharp, really clear and full of detail. Using a 6B pencil, which is a much darker value, we're going to find those shadow areas, and if you squint your eyes you can see the difference between a mid-value tone and a darker value, and this helps guide us when we are placing the finer details. Now you'll see that I'm using a mechanical pencil for adding these fine details, but this is optional. You don't need to use this. It's just something that I prefer to use for making those really small marks. And the best thing about this pencil is that you don't need to sharpen it, and the marks will always remain really thin and really sharp. And we're going to start finishing off this drawing by adding some more scribbled marks. I'm just using the edge of a pencil here just to make the marks a little bit broader, and pressing down slightly firmer to get a darker mark there. And this is just going to create that illusion of leaves. So just by using a few simple, reliable tools, you can draw some really good textured foliage, trees and water, and by practicing this over and over again you're sure to become better. So I hope this video was helpful for you. Please like, subscribe to my channel and leave a comment below. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll see you back here for the next one.